Hey everyone, welcome to today's Explainer. We're diving into a situation that is absolutely dominating the headlines right now, the high-stakes geopolitical tension between the US and Iran. There is just a massive amount of noise, political posturing, and rapidly moving information out there. So, what we're going to do today is cut right through all that. By looking directly at recent reports and expert analysis, we'll break down the underlying strategies of both sides. I'm not here to take sides or tell you what to think. We're just going to lay out the source material so we can objectively decode the mechanics behind this escalation.
Okay, let's look at how we're going to tackle this. First, we'll check out the initial warnings of escalation. Second, we're tracking Iran's immediate diplomatic countermove. Third, we'll unpack the difference between horizontal and vertical escalation. And finally, we'll dive into what experts call the escalation trap.
All right, let's jump straight into part one, warnings of escalation.
You know, there's a fascinating disconnect right now between what's being said and what's actually happening on the ground. On the rhetoric side, U.S. embassies across the Middle East are basically telling citizens to pack their bags due to unforeseen escalation. You've got President Trump talking about hitting Iran very hard and posting pictures of fighter jets on social media. The messaging is intense, right? But then look at the reality. Based on recent reporting, there's zero tangible military movement to back those threats up. For example, the U.S. Air Force Base in Gloucester over in the UK has about 20 B-1 bombers, which is essentially the total number available to the U.S. at any given moment. Reports show absolutely no unusual activity there. And meanwhile, President Trump just stayed at his estate in New Jersey with a lid called early in the morning, meaning he literally wasn't planning on going anywhere. It's wild to see such a massive gap between public threats and actual military mobilization.
Moving right along to part two, Iran's diplomatic countermove.
So how did Iran react to all those warnings? Well, initially, they didn't launch missiles. They launched a diplomatic offensive. Iran's foreign minister, Abbas Iraqi, got straight on the phone with Pakistan's army chief, Turkey's foreign minister, and the Saudi foreign minister. But this definitely wasn't just a friendly catch-up. Tehran used these calls to hurl some very severe accusations at the U.S. They're claiming Washington is outright violating ceasefire agreements in the highly sensitive Strait of Hormuz. They're also accusing the U.S. of using commercial vessels as cover to hide military movements, imposing new naval blockades, and even launching fresh airstrikes against Iranian targets. So essentially, they are working hard to frame the U.S. as the aggressor to all their regional neighbors.
Now, that diplomatic maneuvering, it's backed up by a seriously hardline threat. Tehran is making it crystal clear that they are ready to respond to any aggression against their sovereignty or national security with decisive action. And here's the crucial part. With all the talk about a potential U.S. or Israeli military campaign against Iranian infrastructure, Tehran is threatening to expand its retaliation way beyond the immediate region. They are basically signaling that the blast radius of this conflict will absolutely not be contained.
That brings us to part three, horizontal versus vertical escalation.
To really grasp Iran's playbook here, we're relying on some great expert analysis from Ross Harrison at the Middle East Institute. And to understand it, you have to understand horizontal escalation. Look, Iran knows it cannot go toe-to-toe with the US or Israel in a conventional military fight. It's just not a winnable matchup on paper. So, what's their strategy? They use horizontal escalation. They expand the conflict geographically to hopelessly complicate the battlefield for their enemies. We've seen this exact pattern play out, right? They push the friction out into the Gulf Arab states, down into Yemen, over to Iraq, and even into Jordan and Egypt. But here is where things get genuinely dangerous. It's the tipping point between horizontal and vertical escalation. We just talked about spreading the geographic footprint. But vertical escalation, that means massively stepping up the intensity and devastation of the actual attacks. Harrison points out that if the U.S. were to hit Iranian energy assets or civilian infrastructure, Iran might feel forced to escalate vertically. And that wouldn't just mean targeting American military bases. It means potentially going after civilian infrastructure, water plants, and energy grids in neighboring Gulf Arab states. The analysis suggests Iran would do this reluctantly, but make no mistake. If they feel backed against a wall, it is 100% on the table. Which leads us to our final section, part 4, the escalation trap. In this incredibly tense standoff, Iran's absolute North Star is deterrence. They view this entire situation as an existential crisis. Believe it or not, their biggest fear isn't actually the immediate fighting. It's that they survive this round but lose their deterrence in the process. Why does that matter so much? Because if they lose that leverage, if they lose the ability to scare off future attacks, they figure they'll just end up in another devastating war in 5 or 6 months anyway. So recreating that deterrence is their #1 primary objective for getting out of this conflict safely.
This whole dynamic is captured perfectly in a quote from Ross Harrison. He says, Iran is trying to break out of the escalation trap that Donald Trump is in. The logic here is super fascinating. Iran believes that if the US president is the one dictating the tempo, if he gets to decide exactly when the fighting starts, pauses, and stops, then Iran is just a passenger. They inherently lose their leverage. So they flat out refuse to just capitulate to the pressure, because playing by someone else's rules completely violates that North Star we just talked about, maintaining their own deterrence.
And internally, they are totally gearing up for a prolonged resistance. Following the death of Ayatollah Ali Khamenei at the start of the war, Iran's internal dynamics shifted big time. They moved away from a system where a single adjudicator managed the hardliners and pragmatists, and now they're operating on a highly streamlined consensus-style decision-making system. The big takeaway here is that the Iranian government and the IRGC, the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, are fully, completely aligned right now. They are speaking with one unified voice. Now, the U.S. might think that just one more turn of the screwdriver, one more economic sanction or kinetic strike will finally make Iran fold, but the analysis shows Iran is determined to just absorb that pain and cause massive chaos in return, purely to ensure they walk away with their deterrence intact.
Which brings us to this incredibly sobering quote from Harrison. They don't have a plan B, so they're going to go to the mat on this. I mean, that really highlights the absolute uncompromising resolve built into Iran's current strategy. There is no fallback option for them. Giving in is viewed as institutional suicide. So the threshold for the pain they are willing to endure and the pain they're willing to inflict is terrifyingly high. So that leaves us with a stark, genuinely unsettling reality to think about. On one side, we have a U.S. administration using heavy, aggressive rhetoric but holding back on immediate kinetic strikes. On the other side, we have an Iranian establishment that feels completely backed into a corner, completely unified, desperate to recreate deterrence, and operating entirely without a plan B. When two nations are locked in a psychological and strategic escalation trap with no clear off-ramp, what is the ultimate limit of this conflict? It's a question that is going to define the geopolitical landscape for a long, long time. Thanks for hanging out with me for this explainer today. Keep your eyes on the data and always keep questioning the headlines.